Anybody who watches Saturday night television will know two things. First, Britain's Got Talent. Secondly, talent comes in many different sizes and shapes. So why do leading law firms only recognise and recruit talent when it comes gift-wrapped as a graduate with at least a 2-1? This method of recruitment has led to a situation where the legal profession is inaccessible to many. This was reflected in the 2009 findings of the Panel on Fair Access to the Professions, who noted that 55% of solicitors, as opposed to 7% of the general population, had been independently educated. There is a need for change, and the apprentice lawyer offers us an opportunity to change. It would require the investment of time, money, and energy, and it is therefore necessary to consider the desirability of the model. This can be done by asking and answering 3 questions. First of all, why should the legal profession, and more broadly the private sector, care about diversity of the workforce, and even further, accept responsibility itself for diversifying the workforce? Secondly, is the apprentice lawyer model capable of moving us towards that goal? And lastly, are we sure that this radical change will mean that tomorrow's lawyers are as well trained as today's? In answering all 3 of these questions, it is ultimately clear that the apprentice lawyer would without a doubt be a change for the better. It would allow us to retain our standard of excellence whilst at the same time having a real impact on the diversity of the workforce. The first question: why should the legal profession be concerned with diversity? Now, some people claim that this is a matter for the government, and admittedly the state does have an important role to play. But private sector action is proposed as an addition, not an alternative to state action. Very few people would publicly argue that professional careers should be the preserve of those who are born into professional families. So if we acknowledge that there is a problem, it then seems cowardly to move away from it and refuse to act on the basis that it isn't our problem. There is in fact also a strong business argument in favour of diversity, namely that by having a more diverse workforce, the legal profession will have an access to a varied skill set and be better suited to cater to our diverse society. The second question: is the apprentice lawyer model capable of diversifying the legal profession? Now, let us state at the beginning that it won't be a miracle solution. If one agrees with Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg that the true test of equality is the fair distribution of opportunities, then one must surely also recognise that this is an enormous task. As stated earlier, the state does have a role to play. Children are born into very different socio-economic conditions, and effort must be made in every area of a child's life from a very early age, providing access to healthcare, improving the standards of primary schools, and ensuring access to extracurricular activities. The private sector isn't in a position to establish nurseries or paediatric centres, but it shouldn't just wash its hands of the problem entirely. The adoption of the apprentice lawyer won't achieve perfection, but it will achieve progress, and this is for 2 reasons. Firstly, not everyone can afford university. According to the Panel on Fair Access to the Professions, class remains a strong determinant in participation in higher education. Even if loans are available to contribute towards living expenses and tuition fees, a lot of young people need to start earning once they leave school and can't afford to invest in education. Even those from middle-income families will need to think twice about getting into such a huge magnitude of debt without being able to show they can pay it off, and this is going to be exacerbated by forthcoming increases in tuition fees. Secondly, issues surrounding access to the profession extend beyond financial considerations. The Right Honourable Alan Milburn MP, who led the Panel on Fair Access, noted as much, and in support of his argument, he led the example of a young doctor who almost missed her career because her school didn't know she needed an A-level in chemistry. If law firms can enter classrooms and hold open days for students whilst they're relatively young, say 16 or 17, they'll be able to dispel some of the myths, telling people what qualities they're looking for and what people need to do to get recruited, thus making the legal profession available to those who might not even have considered it.
Julia, could I just...
Yes.
You've made reference several times to the apprenticeship model, and you've given the social context, but actually what is that model? It's not up to the private sector, because actually there isn't a model at the moment. You're going to have to invent one. What would be your model?
Yes. Well, this is our last point, and that question ties very closely in with retaining our standard of excellence. It would be a radical change from having university responsible for a certain amount and then the private sector responsible for the rest. What we would propose is that children would be recruited at school leaver age and then work with the law firms for a period of quite a long time, 4 or 5 years, in a very carefully constructed, multifaceted sort of style of learning. So it would comprise of...
The law firm, in effect, becomes the provider of the education, becomes the university.
Yes, I mean, it wouldn't be entirely traditional classroom learning. I would propose that apprentices would engage in sort of legal secretarial work, as well as more distance-based classroom-style learning, shadowing of senior lawyers. And then at the end of that process, they would be in the position of someone today who has done a university degree, followed by the LPC.
But how do you stop parents with short elbows or connections from simply getting the apprenticeships for their children? So rather than sending them off to university, they recognise it's a good route, but they use their contacts to get them in.
Well, absolutely. And as I said earlier, the legal profession, the model is not going to achieve perfection, and it would require a large amount of effort from the legal profession to go into a variety of schools in Britain to make sure that they're not just going to sort of top comprehensive schools or private schools. And again, no doubt there would be parents trying to get their children in there when they could afford to go to university anyway. But it would hope that there would be a snowball effect. As people from different backgrounds try the apprenticeship, it would grow and develop.
Law firms really want to reverse this, don't they? You started with diversity and ended with excellence. But don't you think law firms are looking at it in exactly the opposite way? And if they determine that the very best candidates are those who've been through the university system, won't they want to stick to the existing model? Isn't what you're proposing forcing them to change direction in a way they'd rather not go?
The legal profession actually stands to gain a lot from adopting a different model.
How is that?
Firstly, because academic studies at university marginalise so many of the qualities that are important to lawyers in day-to-day life, such as negotiation, commercial awareness, and an apprenticeship system would be able to make sure university do that.
It's quite good to know the law before you have to negotiate, though, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I'm not proposing that an 18-year-old school leaver be put in charge of, restructuring RBS, but I think there's no... Perhaps we do a better job, but I think that it's as possible to learn on the job. There's no reason to say that you can't develop analytical and critical thinking skills only within the walls of higher education institutions. It can be developed really anywhere as long as someone invests the time and money into it. Does that help? So as it stands, the university degree is of value to a lawyer, and we must make every effort to preserve a standard of excellence, but the apprenticeship model does not mean moving away from that. For the avoidance of doubt, it would be that even if the apprentice model was adopted, some people would still want to go to university and still want to be lawyers afterwards. So we may have people being recruited as graduates and as apprentices. It's very important, therefore, that the apprentice is at no disadvantage compared to his graduate counterpart. If you put a limit on the work the apprentice can do, say, limiting them to the easier tasks or work governed by a more senior lawyer, then this won't do anything for equality. It will mean that young people are ciphered off depending on whether they can afford university or not. And furthermore, it's unnecessary because the apprentice lawyer should be as skilled as his graduate counterpart. Not everyone will want to be a lawyer, and indeed not everyone is capable of being a lawyer. But in every classroom, in every school, in a variety of schools across Britain, there are young people who are motivated, bright, and capable of making the legal profession better than it is today. Britain's got talent, but what use is talent in the absence of opportunity? Thank you.